Hello again, beautiful humans. Please help me welcome Phil to the stage. Phil Nash is a principal developer evangelist at Twilio. And is that like the hyped up name of a DevRel?
Principal developer evangelist, I guess so. I think it's just because I've been doing it for such a long time.
It sounds really cool. Like that's what I want to be when I grow up. That like
Right.
because it's so important to support our developers, and I'm excited to get into your presentation. So once again, thank you for coming on the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jen. And I'm absolutely delighted to have to follow Alex and Kyle there, because this really does follow on from a lot of the things that they've been saying about like building that API program and building the API itself. Whereas I get to come from it from a developer relations point of view and talk about a bit of that go-to-market strategy, but through the lens of developers and APIs. So let's get into talking about supporting 10 million developers. So my name's Phil Nash. I am a developer evangelist at Twilio. Twilio, if you don't know, is an API for communications and for customer engagement. That means you can use Twilio as an API in your application to do things like send and receive text messages, make and receive phone calls, send emails, make video chats, all sorts of things that you can think of to do with communications and connecting your customers and better understanding your customers. That's kind of the things you can do with Twilio. And of course, it's entirely an API. If you want to find me at all online, I'm always happy to answer questions or help out. I'm Phil Nash, basically anywhere on the internet, or just hit me up on email at philnash@twilio.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd also love to hear from you if you are in the chat. Like, give us a wave, because it's always nice to know people are out there and where you're coming from. Like, I'm broadcasting to you this morning from Melbourne, Australia. I think it's still Wednesday for most of the people watching, but I'm here on Thursday morning, and it's a nice place to be in the future. So let's talk about supporting 10 million developers. I have had the fortune of working at Twilio for almost 8 years myself now, in the role of developer evangelist, and we've been building Twilio and building this API for a long time. We're very fortunate now to have kind of more than 250,000 customers and have signed up more than 10 million developers to the platform. None of that I think is necessarily an accident. A lot of it follows even the things that we just said in the Q&A just now, that testing out APIs and getting them in front of people and working out what you can do with them, then working out how you can how those APIs bring value to your customers, to your developers, is super important. And I've seen a lot of that over the time at Twilio. But I kind of want to talk about how we've managed to grow and support that user base via developer relations. It's the kind of thing I've been doing all of that time. And the story of developer relations really starts very early on at Twilio, well before I even started. Like, we've been going, what are we, 2022 now, 14, 15 years almost. And so because the product was initially an API and only an API, developer relations has always been absolutely core to our ability to talk about what we do. And in fact, our belief at Twilio that developers are indeed the future of building businesses and products. And so it very much started that we had evangelists almost from the beginning, going out and telling developers about the program, about the API. And this got me thinking almost in terms of a sort of hierarchy of developer of relations, and the sort of things that you might consider doing with your own API as you try to gain adoption for it and talk about it with other developers. Now, I don't know. I've seen many triangles of things, and I'll get to more about how I ended up building this up at the end and whether it actually applies to you or not. But I did kind of feel like I ended up with this sort of hierarchy of important things. And then right at the bottom of it is absolutely sort of well-designed API and documentation. You cannot do developer relations if you don't have a well-designed API and documentation for that API in the first place. there just isn't a thing like that. And again, this follows very closely from what the previous talk was saying. Now, of course, we could spend an entire conference talking about how to design APIs well and run them well. We probably are. It's a wonderful place to be at API Days, at Interface here. But hopefully what we sort of intuitively know what a well-designed API is as well. If you've ever used one, you can point at one and say, I enjoyed using that one and I didn't enjoy using that one. And I imagine there's a few things about that, but the kind of things, well, we could spend an entire conference talking about everything I've got to say, but I've only got 20 minutes, so that's kind of where we're going with this. But when I talk about well-designed APIs, I sort of mean things that are consistent and predictable. And like I said, we don't have much time to talk about this, but I think like when you pick a pattern for an API, perhaps it's REST, perhaps it's GraphQL these days, that consistency across all the APIs is super important. Ability to, as a developer, know when you're calling an API, know what to expect back. And then when you go to call the next API, the next product along the line, that it should work similarly and predictably. And that kind of thing makes the whole experience a lot nicer. Now, as I say, I don't have time to talk about that too much. I did want to point out that Twilio's voice APIs, the voice API was the first one that we ever came up with. People might think it was the text messaging one, but voice was actually the first thing launched. And the voice API launched, as you can see in the URL, on the 1st of August in 2008. And now that API maybe wasn't the best designed API. It was the first version. It was Go number 1. And so version 2, the 2010 API, hilariously launched on the 1st of April 2010, still there in the URLs today, and absolutely not a joke. We've launched more than enough things on April Fool's Day these days. Some real, some not. But that second one, I think, was the kind of refactoring of the API that has allowed us to build upon that same API, specifically with the voice APIs and also the messaging APIs, since 2010. Only kind of deprecating like the occasional property and mostly building upon that. And so being able to do that has made the rest of kind of building of Twilio and the APIs a lot easier, because there was that good base API. And then, of course, documentation. Now, an undocumented API just doesn't exist to developers. Maybe, that's the point. If you haven't documented an API, you don't want it to exist to developers. And that's sort of a security by obscurity kind of method, I guess. But documentation absolutely has to be baked into your API from the very beginning. And that probably starts a reference, and that probably starts with the developers building that API. But it can go much, much, much beyond that. And over the years, we've built up many different ways of kind of documenting, from quick start applications that allow people to get going quickly and experience the API without having to build an entire application themselves, to full-blown tutorials which take on a use case and build it out not just build it out, not just give you the code, but walk through the code as it's being built, which is super important. But the most important thing, I think, we realized early on, and again as we've gone through this, is that all documentation needs code. Like, we're developers trying to get something done, and it's so funny to see any developer like hit a page of documentation, hit a blog post, hit anything like that, and almost immediately scroll until you see the code block, because that's the thing we actually care about, and that's the thing that's going to solve our problem. All of the documentation, all of the prose is important, of course, and it's what you then refer back to once you've kind of read that code example, hopefully in your own language. But documentation absolutely has to be built around the code, around the things that are going to help people use it and even copy and paste it. So that's kind of our basis there, the well-designed API and documentation. Without that, we don't have any kind of developer relations or any kind of strategy to tell other developers about it, because without a well-designed, well-thought-out API, and without the documentation for that, nobody gets anything done. So stepping up the level, and this is sort of has been my job for a lot of this time. It's sort of awareness and evangelism play. Developer evangelism is still a job where people ask me, like, what do you do all day? And the answer is very rarely the same thing. Yesterday I was writing code and answering questions on Stack Overflow. Today I'm giving a talk here, and I actually have another talk later to give in a completely different place. It's still the magic of online events, being that I can be with you this morning, and I guess kind of interfaces mostly live. We're sort of in a US time zone, although I know there's replays, and then I can come back to my own time zone later to give a talk. And then I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. Haven't worked it out yet. But evangelism is a whole bunch of things, right? It's very much rooted in the fact that evangelists should, I think, be technical and going out to speak authentically with developers to tell them about the API and find out from them what's going on with the API themselves. And so evangelism tends to find itself in a whole tangle of things like technical blog posts and writing content, going to hackathons and taking an API to developers and seeing them using it, and encouraging them to use it and helping them when they get stuck. Going to conferences and meetups and talking about things and being available to that community to help them out and explain the API, and other content like newsletters or even workshops, where and I'll come back to workshops in a bit. All of these kind of production things that evangelism go through kind of exist to serve, at least at Twilio, have existed to serve kind of two things. And it was always our mission within the Twilio developer evangelism team to inspire and equip developers to fuel the future of communications. Now, I'm not normally the person who gets on board with a mission statement from a team, but this one actually did do a good job at reaching to me, at least. Because the two words in there that are important and have highlighted are to inspire and equip developers. You see, developer evangelism isn't just to go out there and tell people about an API and just tell them it exists and get them to use it. Instead, it's to inspire them, to show them that this API does exist, and these are the things you can do with it. These are the ways that you as a developer level up by knowing and understanding this API. And so that's exciting, but it has to be followed with equip as well, equipping developers to use the API. In our case, which was fueling the future of communications, but you can kind of fill in, if you're building an API, your own subject matter at the end of that. But if you're there to inspire them and then to equip them, that is to follow up not just that inspirational stuff, but with the knowledge of how something gets used, how you build with something, and that builds upon the documentation as well. Then that is sort of evangelism in a nutshell for me, and allows you to interact just authentically with developers all over the world. But many of those things also point to advocacy. And whilst I'm not normally somebody who likes to talk separately about evangelism and advocacy, I think it's important that where I've talked about evangelism there as kind of being an outbound thing, advocacy is maybe the inbound thing, where learning from developers using that API is something you can then take back to the business, take back to the product teams and help them out with that feedback as well. Because developer evangelists and advocates, I always consider as kind of two things. Kind of the first user of an API. They're a good developer. Certainly in our team, we don't work underneath the API. I don't know what goes on under the hood. I have no idea how you actually make a phone call happen. I just work on top of the API. And so understanding how the APIs work and then how I would work with them is good feedback to the product teams, but understanding how developers in the field do so as well. And so I've got this same list of things up as what I consider as advocacy. because I think actually maybe aside from newsletters, that one should be maybe dropped from this list. But all of these activities are things that allow either you as an evangelist or an advocate to use the API, or to take it and see other developers using it as well. And using that opportunity to feed back to the product teams just is a great feedback loop, and allows you to, again, build and support that community, and allows you to support a community in terms of being helping those developers understand that we're on their side as well. That's important. So I'm going to run out of time. I've been just talking about evangelism all this time. I'm very excited about it. I think like a next step up from this then becomes kind of specialization and expansion of the various things that we do. This is as you kind of get to grow a team and realize what's good at what is good for the API and what you can double down on. And so we've kind of gone through two different routes that I can think of specifically about specialization that have really kind of helped us target developers in different places and help them out. And that's been startup evangelism and then enterprise evangelism. And so clearly, like when you talk about developers in general, you just talk about people who write code, and it doesn't matter what they might be doing, and just getting them excited about what they can do with an API is fun and really useful. But engineers, CTOs, and startups have very different kind of problems they have on hand. They have less time and more things to do, and are also, of course, interested in support credits and things around funding and things like that. So being able to build what we did is build a team that is helps out startups and has deep-rooted knowledge in both that ecosystem, as well as being able to help them on that kind of technical level as well. And then secondly, enterprise evangelism has been a different way of going about things, in which we've taken that idea of hackathons. And if you've ever been to kind of a public hackathon, which is mostly a lot of fun, quite intense, but a great experience overall, building and learning things, that's not necessarily something the enterprise gets that often. But we've taken hackathons to the enterprise in order to give developers problems to solve and the tools to solve them. And they find a lot of learning in a very short space of time, which has been very useful for both the enterprises and the developers in that enterprise, as well as for us seeing how the APIs get used in those environments. And expansion really has come to us in terms of content, where we've ended up building out third-party content. A lot of the blog posts and tutorials that we now put on Twilio.com come from third-party contributors. And they're always high quality because we have a team of editors and technical people building on this. But the amount of content that we've been able to produce for this has helped both attract people in, but also just give so many options and so many ways to build with Twilio. And of course, there's a champions program as well. The idea that we can try and make further evangelists out of our community as well. And you'll see other champions programs, Google Developer Experts and Salesforce Trailblazers. Yes, I think all those kind of things exist to support the community, but have them kind of spread the word as well. And then student programs, finally, where we're kind of hitting in students as they start. And as I run out of time, I just want to go quickly into experiments, and they kind of sit at the top of this hierarchy. And experiments, I think the sort of fun things we get to do that may or may not work. And we've had a couple of these things. Firstly, we've done a bunch of streaming video, and this is an experiment I think a lot of developer relations teams have done in the last couple of years, given that we couldn't go out to events and things like that. But streaming video has gone not just from writing code on stream, but we've hosted game shows on Twitch, and we are now continually streaming like our main conference for the year, just as different ways of interacting with the crowd. And then our other big experiment, which I think I love, is Twilio Quest, which is our game that we released, which helps you. I mean, it gives a whole backstory. You're on a ship right now, but at the end of the day, it allows you to also like it helps you learn how to use the Twilio APIs and all through this wonderful 8-bit kind of thing with a little character there. Just wanted to show that off quickly. I think Twilio Quest is wonderful. But I mentioned workshops earlier, and the fact that Twilio Quest exists comes from the fact that we wanted to do slightly more interesting workshops. And so that brings that hierarchy, but that's not exactly how it all comes together. And that's, I think, the interesting part of this. In fact, really, it all kind of starts with well-designed API and documentation, which I can only thank the founders of Twilio for, and the initial like development team for building that out, because then everything else on top of that became experiments. And we started with evangelism, trying to build awareness of this, and that turned to advocacy as well in terms of taking feedback from the field back to product teams. That turned into specialization and that expansion kind of thing, and where we learned which bits, which levers that we can pull to bring more people to the API or bring the API to more people. And then we still continue with the experiments, and they're very, very important. And like I said, I also don't think this necessarily grew in that order either. There's been different spikes of different things that have happened at different times. And like I said, workshops started, we wanted to, because we have a bunch of APIs, we wanted to build workshops that appealed to everybody who was anybody who wanted to use Twilio. But the way we ended up doing that was building kind of choose your own adventure workshops where you could work on things. And then the way to do that was to build a game kind of out of it. And ultimately that turned into this desktop 2D top-down thing. But it went through multiple iterations in order to get there. And so the experiments are always important. And understanding what developers want. But ultimately, if you have an API and you are trying to support your developers and support them from your first to your 10 millionth developer working on it, the best advice I have is to work in service of your developers. Anything that I have talked about so far has been all of the things that we do in the developer relations team at Twilio exist to serve the developers that want to use the API. From the technical content to the workshops to hackathons in enterprises, all of those kind of serve the developers and help them understand what they can do and what they can achieve. And that way, it sort of turns supporting 10 million developers into supporting one developer at a time. That's how we've ended up kind of scaling this by doing things that don't scale and that ultimately scale into that hierarchy. So that is all I've got time for this morning, or afternoon for you. The story of developer relations at Twilio and how we build support for all of those developers comes from that basis of a good API and documentation, and the experiments and service to developers that we try to layer on top of that. And if you have any questions about that, I'd absolutely love to take them right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I know we don't have a ton of time for Q&A. I did just want to say, yes, we can't see everybody raising their hand, but like, let's raise our hand to say who's going to be reaching out to Phil, because I know I have questions and loved your presentation. Thank you. I did want to quickly comment that we had a guest checked out Twilio in 2010 and they felt like it was talking to them. And I think that's just really powerful about how we can really make the developer experience and be a part of that and what we want to strive for in future companies. And thank you again, Phil, for coming in and being a guest.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, have a great rest API days.
Thank you.